The night was lacking stars, and the chill in the air was only eased by the roaring campfire. The raiders were perched low to the ground on cinder blocks, swigging Nuka-Cola and whiskey, laughing at the struggles of those they'd just slain. Simon, the leader of this particular group, sat slightly elevated on an overturned trolley. His right foot rested on the corpse of a female settler. That one put up quite a fight, didn't she? The raider opposite him, Jack, said, tilting his alcohol-infused Nuka-Cola bottle at Simon. They all come around eventually, Simon replied, smirking as he took a drink. Looks like we're hitting that shit point of the night where the crows come for the leftovers. Bill, shoo 'em off, will ya? Bill was slumped over his block, barely keeping himself upright. He drank like a fish every night and never failed to provide entertainment for the others. Bill looked up. His eyes were glazed over and he had a dopey grin on his face. Sure thing, boss. He slurred and stumbled to his feet. Despite being on flat, solid ground in the middle of the forest, Bill looked more like an inexperienced trapeze artist tiptoeing across a tightrope. The other raiders erupted into laughter as he stepped clumsily in every direction, knocking into trees. The laughter reached a crescendo when Bill fell on his face, landing directly on top of one of the murdered settlers from earlier that night. Why, the raiders cheered. I think he likes you, Billy, Jack heckled. Bill eventually found his composure and scared off the encroaching crows. He then dropped his weight back on the cinder block by the fire and opened his mouth to speak. All done, bot. His words were cut off by the sudden sound of a .50 caliber bullet. Bill's inebriated expression vanished and his head exploded from the impact of the round between his eyes. Panic set in around the campfire and the remaining raiders sprung to their feet. In a drunken stupor, they fumbled around to find their weapons in the dim light. Where the fuck did that come from? Jack screamed. I don't fucking know, just get down, Simon said as they started running in the other direction. Another shot fired and the raider just ahead of Simon fell, sending a spray of blood onto his face. He spat the metallic taste from his mouth and kept running. In the darkness, and thanks to the whiskey, the trees seemed to sway violently, resonating with the powerful booms of the .50 cal rounds. The fact he couldn't see where the shots were coming from scared Simon the most. He felt entirely vulnerable. He threw himself behind the cover of a tree, hoping that it would block off the attacker's vision. Jack! He called. I'm just over here, boss. Jack was standing behind a tree a few meters away. He had his pipe pistol loaded. I'll lay down cover fire to keep him occupied. You run. Lugos won't listen to anyone but you if we turn up without his money. He lifted the pistol, gripping it firmly in both hands. Simon nodded and got ready to sprint. Jack swiftly stepped out of cover, but before he could pull the trigger, his head caved beneath the force of a bullet. There was the boom again, ringing in Simon's skull each time one of his companions was killed. He diverted his eyes away from his fallen ally and onto the gun laying on the ground. He didn't want to give the attacker time to reload, so he jumped out of cover reaching for the gun. As he gripped it, another round was fired. The ringing was overpowered this time by an overwhelming pain in his arm. He screamed with agony, found himself unable to maneuver his hands. It just sat limp, tantalizingly close to gripping the pistol. He instinctively turned to run and made it 5 steps before the echo of death resounded through the forest again. The next thing Simon knew, he was lying face first in the dirt and leaves, clutching his now wounded legs with his strong arm. He rolled onto his back, writhing from the pain which throbbed with intensity all through his limbs. He was looking back towards the campfire. The remnants of the gunfires booming had disappeared, and now all he could hear was the crackle of burning twigs and his own ragged breathing. From the darkness behind the orange flow of the fire emerged a man in a ghillie suit. In his hands was a brilliantly kept .50 caliber sniper rifle. The polished black barrel shone like obsidian as it absorbed the heat of the fire. Simon's head was swimming now. Whether from the alcohol or the shock of the blood loss, he didn't care. The camouflaged man stalking towards him was the Reaper himself, punishing him for his life choices. As the man with the rifle neared, Simon could make out his features. He was young, but his face was creased with the deep marks of frown lines. His head was shaved, which also seemed to age him 10 years, and his eyes were covered by night vision goggles. His apparent success taking down all of the raiders was not evident as the man's grim expression didn't falter. Please! Simon wasn't surprised at the effort it took just to utter that word. He found himself sucking in a full breath before continuing. Whatever it is you want. He inhaled deeply again. You won't find it here. Simon tried to mask his fear, but the man wasn't fooled. The footfalls stopped, and the gillied man stooped over him, observing Simon with a disdain that was almost tangible. "Your boss, Lugos. Where is he?" the man demanded. "I have no idea what you're talking about, I swear." The man raised his rifle, pointing it at Simon's face. "Please," he begged. "He'll kill me if I betray him, and you'll kill me either way. Tell me where Lugos is, and I won't shoot you. It's him I want, not you. Please, His plea was cut off as the man stomped his boot on Simon's wounded leg. A flush of pain engulfed him, and as he screamed, the man trod down with increasing force. "This is your last chance. I will shoot you if you do not answer me." Simon couldn't see the man's eyes. "I'll have to wash my boot after touching filth like you. If you say one more thing that isn't Lugos's location, I will pull the trigger." Simon swallowed his fear. His eyes were crossed, staring at the slick black barrel resting between his nose and his forehead. "There's an old manufacturing plant," Simon said. "Just northwest of here. If you head that way, you'll find a road. Follow it for about 20 miles and you'll find it. He'll be there for another week or so." The barrel didn't move from its position on his head, but the man bolted it, preparing to fire. "Please, you said you wouldn't shoot." Simon's words came out in a frantic hurry, and spit landed on the barrel as he spoke. To his relief, his plea seemed to get through to the man, who nodded and raised the weapon, adjusting his grip so that he held the sniper by the barrel in both hands, with the stock facing down. He buffed the spit from the gun, restoring its perfect sheen. "You're right. I did say I wouldn't shoot you." The man raised the weapon above his head, fully extending his arms, and then he brought the stock down hard on Simon's face, crushing his skull. The body spasmed from the impact, and the last remaining life was gone from his body. The man in the ghillie suit stalked over to the campfire. He took a seat on 3 stacked cinder blocks and rested his trusty sniper rifle against his leg. He sat in silence for a few minutes. The calm of the soft night breeze was eerie at first. The firing of his rifle had sent the subtler sounds of the forest fleeing, but now in the quiet aftermath of the 2 slaughters, they crept back in. The crackling of the fire regained its voice, and then he noticed the crows beginning to edge closer, hopping from one branch to the next. The man reeled in his wandering mind and shifted his attention to the dog tags hanging from his neck. In the commotion, they'd gotten tangled. He hadn't noticed that he'd been so focused on his aim. Liam Cartwright. His name was etched in bold lettering above the rank of knight, and underneath were codes and serial numbers. On the other side of the tangled tag was a Brotherhood of Steel insignia. Liam straightened the tags so they rested on top of one another, and then tucked them back into his shirt. Liam picked up his rifle and laid it across his lap. He dismantled the weapon piece by piece before placing them neatly on the block beside him. He removed a cloth from his pocket and began scrubbing each piece meticulously. When it came time to clean the barrel, he picked up a small twig and wrapped the cloth around it before inserting it carefully. As he cleaned, he felt a strange sensation within him. He could feel eyes on him. He raised his head and scoured his surroundings, noting every detail. On the other side of the campfire was the headless corpse of a raider slumped against the tree. Liam had killed this 1/3. Emerging from the shoulders of the raider's spiked armor was a stump where his neck had ended abruptly. It was still glistening red from blood which hadn't yet dried. Perched on one of these spikes was a crow. It had been picking at the remains, and it had a piece of dripping viscera in its beak. It was looking directly at him. It had beady black eyes which shone in a similar way to his rifle. Liam pulled his goggles off his eyes and let them hang around his neck, revealing his bright blue eyes. They were youthful eyes, and they nearly betrayed his gruff demeanor. Liam and the crow locked eyes for a moment, and then it swallowed the flesh, before getting back to its feast. His gaze lingered, and he watched as the crow tore the meat from the dead man's wound almost joyfully. Then he returned to his work, using the therapeutic process of cleaning to begin plotting out his attack on the raider-infested compound. These raiders were well organized. Liam crouched behind a large pipe at the base of the old manufacturing plant. There were raised catwalks everywhere, and raiders routinely patrolled them and the long metal staircases leading up to them. The first level had only a few targets, but the problem was dispatching them without the ones walking above getting suspicious. "I'll have to be quick," Liam thought. He pulled his 9mm pistol from its holster on his right leg and screwed a silencer on the end. With his other hand, he loosened the combat knife in his belt, preparing it for quick access. And then, when the raider above him turned and started walking with his back to him, Liam vaulted the pipe and carefully navigated his way toward the first unsuspecting target. He timed his movement with the raider walking above, ensuring he'd stay at a slightly slower pace. He crept up behind the first guard, stood upright, and dragged the blade of the knife across the raider's throat. As he did so, he covered the raider's mouth to avoid any unwanted outbursts. With no eyes on his position, he decided not to waste a second hiding the body. The absence of men was usually enough to alarm any savvy guards anyway, and any guards who weren't savvy wouldn't be an issue for Liam. By the time the body hit the ground, he was on the way to the staircase at the far end of the lower floor where one more guard was posted. Liam gave him the same treatment. He had timed it so that the guard above would be turning back to the patrol in his direction in about 10 paces. Once he heard the 10th step, he dashed up the staircase, 3 steps at a time, and before the guard could react to the corpses below him, Liam pulled the trigger, sending a silenced round through the back of the man's head. He was more exposed now on these catwalks, so he remained vigilant, his finger resting on the trigger. 2 raiders were chatting up ahead. This was more like the behavior Liam had come to expect from raiders. Had they been patrolling, life would have been much harder. He let off 2 9mm rounds in quick succession, killing the first guard and dealing with the second just as he started to gasp from surprise. Liam pressed on, reaching a set of double doors which had led into the plant. Inside was a huge high-ceilinged room. On the floor there were half-built pre-war cars scattered around, and protruding from the metal beams of the ceiling were automated contraptions, presumably used to assemble the cars. Liam took cover behind the closest car before surveying the area. There were guards patrolling the assembly room, and a catwalk ran along the top, leading to an office with boarded windows. Liam navigated his way through the maze of cars to remain out of sight until he was close to the first guard. He drew his combat knife again. He swept the legs out from under the guard, bringing him out of sight, and then he thrust the knife up through the raider's jaw, killing him instantly. He continued on the same way. One by one, the guards whose torsos and heads rose above the level of the surrounding unbuilt cars descended out of sight before being silently dispatched of. When the room was empty, Liam stood up straight, making his way up to the catwalk and up to the office door. He turned the knob with his left hand and aimed his weapon through the opening with his right. Before he could fully open the door, Liam was taken aback by the sight of a sharp axe blade slashing at him. It missed, but the door swung open violently, revealing Lugos. Lugos was a giant slab of a man. He was thickly muscled and his black hair fell to his neck. His fringe somewhat covered the vine tattoo under his right eye, and there was a streak of tattooed tears going down along the left contours of his dark face. He was dressed in leather armor but wore steel-cap boots with rusted spikes jutting from the front. And in his right hand, he held a tomahawk. Another strike came at him, and Liam stepped under it, ramming his shoulder into Lugos's chest. He dropped the pistol and drew his knife, before turning to face the raider boss. Lugos was ferocious and over-aggressive. He came at Liam with yet another lunge which exposed his torso completely. Liam hopped to one side and jabbed the knife towards Lugos, but the raider boss's other hand caught the blow, causing their arms to become entangled. Their arms wrestled for a moment, each man trying to break free before the other. Liam withdrew his hand and threw a right hook at the boss's exposed face. Blood spurted from Lugos's mouth. He turned back towards Liam, a primal fury showing on his face. His bloodied teeth were bared, and he let out a rasping cry of rage. Lugos started kicking, sending powerful spiked pendulums arcing at him. Liam dodged the first, but was off balance for the second. He was forced to halt the blow with the sole of his foot, and the spikes penetrated his boot, shooting a sharp pain up his leg. Liam had to get Lugos on the ground if he wanted to avoid those kicks. He charged at Lugos, ignoring the pain in his foot, and slammed into the heavy man. They landed hard on the office desk before the force of the impact carried them onto the floor behind. Liam got up first. Lugos reached up his hand to rest his hand on the wall, helping him to regain his balance, but as he stood, Liam stabbed the knife through his hand, pinning him to the wall. Lugos, bellowing, turned from anger to agony, and he tried to dislodge his hand from the wall unsuccessfully. And then the gun cocked. Liam was pointing the pistol directly at him, and in his other hand was Lugos's dropped tomahawk. "Nathaniel Grayson. Where is he?" Liam yelled. The composure on his usually measured expression was cracking, corrupted by resolute rage. Liam didn't wait for a response. He moved over to Lugos's impaled hand and rested the blade of the tomahawk on the little finger. For each wrong answer, a finger comes off. By my count, that's 5 strikes and then it's your head. Whoa, hold on a second. Nathaniel who? You're Lugos, right? Before turning to raiding, you were a leader of a mercenary group. I followed this fucking trail since Philadelphia, and I know you worked with a man named Nathaniel Grayson, formerly an Enclave soldier. Don't you fucking play dumb. Him, the guy in the black power, I haven't seen him for years. Lugos's threatening air was gone now, and his words were disrupted by the trembling of his body. Liam had this self-proclaimed tough guy shitting his pants now. That might be so, but you have connections in every corner of the East Coast. I don't care when you last saw him. Give me something concrete or the fingers come off. And who the fuck are you to demand things from me? Lugos seemed to regret his boldness instantly, but Liam wasn't feeling forgiving. He slammed the tomahawk down at the base of the leader's little finger, and it fell off to the floor with a thump. Lugos screamed in agony. My boys... Lugos sucked in a breath and tried to calm himself. They reported to me a while ago. They said there was some guy in power armor they've never seen before wandering around in the Commonwealth. He even killed some of my raiders near Concord a couple years back. As you said, it's my business to know this shit, and I'm certain it's him. Lugos wasn't hiding his fear now. He was petrified. He's here in Boston, and that's all I know. Liam took the tomahawk away from Lugos's fingers. A moment of relief came across Lugos's eyes. Liam reeled back his arms and swung the tomahawk at Lugos's neck, decapitating him. The head tumbled to the ground, and his body went limp, held up only by the knife in his hand. Liam pulled the knife free, wiped it on his leathers, and put it back in his belt. He gathered all of his gear that was scattered from the fight and left the plant without looking back. You can't hide from me any longer. Liam almost smiled.